Please rise and remain standing as cadets from Maine Army ROTC present the colors, followed by our national anthem.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the University of Maine and the 2013 William S. Cohen Lecture, sponsored by the William S. Cohen Center for International Policy and Commerce at the University of Maine. We're so pleased you've joined us on this beautiful blue sky day at the University of Maine. Mr. Secretary, they're like this every day, as you know. We are so very pleased to have you on this very special day. This is a wonderful event that we have at the university to welcome the Secretary home. We're so proud to host Secretary Cohen and our special guest today, Senator Alan Simpson, to discuss one of the most pressing issues of our time. Today we will have a very stimulating and timely discussion on the highly relevant topic of civility with Senator Simpson. Senator, welcome back to Maine. It's a pleasure to have you. P.M. Forney, the founder of the Civility Institute at Johns Hopkins University and the author of The Civility Solution, has described the current climate in our world. Forney said this: "In today's America, incivility is on prominent display. In the schools where bullying is pervasive, in the workplace where an increasing number are more stressed out by coworkers than their jobs, on the roads where road rage maims and kills, in politics where strident intolerance take the place of earnest dialogue, and on the web where many check their inhibitions at the digital door. Forney suggests that a healthy democratic society depends on the robust practice of civility. We are so grateful today for the insightful and experience-filled perspectives of both Secretary Cohen and Senator Simpson on the value, indeed the necessity, of civility in our political discourse. Each of them has heightened our understanding not only by their comments today, as we look forward to, but by their stellar examples in their public service. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce today Secretary William S. Cohen, who will then introduce Senator Simpson. Although deserving a very long and detailed introduction today, Bill Cohen is known well and deeply respected by each one of us here today. Mr. Secretary, that's like coming home every time. The Christian Science Monitor called Bill Cohen a true Renaissance man. Now, if you don't recall what the meaning of a Renaissance man is, this refers to a person who is skilled in multiple fields or multiple disciplines, who has a broad base of knowledge. In fact, as you recall, the term Renaissance man is largely based on the various artists and scholars of the European Renaissance. Perhaps the quintessential Renaissance man of that period was Leonardo da Vinci. That's not bad company to be in, Mr. Secretary. Now, just what does that imply for Bill Cohen? No question that high compliment would reflect the record that he has had in his personal and public life. It would include his unique record of being a published author of 11 works of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry, a futurist with degrees in classical Latin and Greek, the son of a working-class family who rose to the highest levels of government. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives, Senate, and as Secretary of the Department of Defense. From his very first days in Washington, Secretary Cohen was singled out as a future American leader. In 1974, during his very first term in Congress, Time magazine named him as America's 200 future leaders. And the following year, the U.S. Junior Chamber of Commerce named him one of the 10 outstanding young men in America. This description of Renaissance man reflects the national prominence that Secretary Cohen attained as a freshman Republican congressman, who was tasked by the House Judiciary Committee to build on national television the evidentiary base for impeachment of President Nixon, who then cast one of the critical votes to impeach. But it also reflected the recognition that the intellectual clout, integrity, and independence, and public persuasiveness he demonstrated during the Watergate hearings portended a future without bounds on the national scene. It reflects his election to the Senate, defeating a highly respected incumbent, and during his first weeks in the Senate, he was singled out to be chairman of two very powerful subcommittees, the Armed Services Committees on Sea Power and Force Projection, and the Subcommittee on Governmental Affairs Committee on Oversight. It also reflects his role as chairman of the Senate Committee on Aging, leading efforts to improve the efficiency of Medicare and other health care programs, and was a central player in the health care reform debates of the 1990s. It truly reflects his role as a member of the Select Committee on Intelligence for a decade, serving half of that time as vice chairman, overseeing a large budget involving some of the nation's most advanced technology. It also reflects his sustained leadership on environmental issues, giving him the distinction of being the only Republican senator endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters, re-election after re-election, while his efforts on behalf of small business and early leadership in reversing federal deficits won him awards from the National Federation of Independent Businessmen and the National Taxpayers Union. It truly reflects his international experience and his selection to the Board of Directors of the Council on Foreign Relations, and his leadership of numerous international study groups and committees at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the School for Advanced International Studies, and the Brookings Institute. The impact of this Renaissance quality was truly reflected in his service in the House and Senate, characterized by electoral success as well, for he was undefeated in 6 consecutive Maine elections, winning each by wide margins. It is also reflected in his surprising desire in 1996 to retire and return to private life, to promote international business, and through his writings and the media, a more thoughtful public discourse on national political issues. He also launched the William S. Cohen Center for International Policy and Commerce at this great university, the University of Maine. The Cohen Center has become an anchor and catalyst for our School of Policy and International Affairs, as well as inspiration for a new initiative at the University of Maine, the Institute for Leadership and Democracy, that will aim to integrate our policy and education programs to model the Maine way of leadership exemplified by Secretary Cohen and many of our iconic Maine legislators at the national level. Perhaps the most significant recognition of his Renaissance quality was the remarkable request of Bill Clinton in 1997 for Bill Cohen to lead the Department of Defense, the first time in modern U.S. history when a president has chosen an elected official from the other party to be a member of the cabinet. After 31 years of public service, Secretary Cohen leaves behind a record of unparalleled accomplishment, integrity, and respect, and takes with him unrivaled knowledge, reputation, and relationships across America and across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maine's true Renaissance man, Secretary Bill Cohen.
Thank you so much. Mr. President, thank you for your very gracious and overly generous remarks that I almost said I could listen to you all day. And that was the brief introduction he said he was going to give. So, but I think you covered more than I had ever expected or hoped for. But thank you very much for your kind words. And let me thank all of you who are here. I've been looking forward to this for some time, and the school itself has been a joy for me. As many of you know, I had the occasion to teach at the university for some nearly 6 years before I ran for Congress back in 1972. And I'd like to say a word of thanks to Jan Staples, who's worked so hard to make everything possible for me to get here and to organize it all. And there are some very special people in the audience. I can't see you, but I know you're here. Admiral Grog Johnson, graduate of the University of Maine, and truly one of our finest admirals that I had the pleasure of working with at the Pentagon. And he counseled me wisely on many, many occasions, and just a great public servant, naval aviator, and someone who kept me on the straight pathway as I was trying to glide into the correct course. So, Grog, it's great to see you. I know you were out there, and I had a chance to say hello before. We have others, of course, in the audience that I wanted to say a word about. General Ralph Leonard. Ralph, you have been just one of the, when you say the word stalwart, you immediately think of Ralph Leonard. He has been a stalwart not only for his company and his business enterprise, but certainly as a West Pointer and somebody who year after year remained faithful to that great institution and to the military that he loves and to the people of Maine. Ralph is one of the real, genuine stars in this cosmos that we have. And I want to say how glad I am to see you, Ralph, and to say again my condolences about Anita. But the two of you have just been great Maine citizens. So thanks for being here today. You know, there's that old expression that when you see a frog on a lamppost, you know he didn't get there on his own. And I feel like that frog because I have a couple of people in the audience tonight, and more than just a couple, but two that I'll pick out. Tom Daffrin. Tom Daffrin is married to someone named Susan Collins. But Tom was my first chief of staff back in 1973 when I started in the House of Representatives. He was then serving Senator Charles Percy. And I don't think it's ever been, it was not done before, but certainly it hadn't been done to my knowledge, that a key staffer of a United States senator would ever deign to go across the Capitol and work for a young congressman from Bangor, Maine. But he gave up his prestigious role in the Percy office and came and worked for me and helped get me started. So Tom, thank you very much for being here today. The Woodcock family, I mean, nothing happens in Maine without the Woodcock family being involved somehow, but Tim Woodcock has been with me over the years. He was with me during a very difficult time in Washington, and certainly during Iran-Contra, the Indian land claims case. Tim was by my side as the great attorney as he is, and helping to guide me. And he and Carol, his wife Carol, who continues to serve the public today, but the two Woodcocks have been just stellar citizens of this great state. And so, Tim and Carol, thank you for being here. Finally, but not the least, my two sons are here today. Kevin, who was I hate to say this now, but graduate of Bowdoin College, along with me, but a far better student than I ever was, and now lives in Atlanta, and I've been in the process of trying to persuade him to move back to Maine. He has a small place in Castine, but I'd like him to pick up the roots that are pretty shallow down in Atlanta and sink them back up here in the States. So Kevin, it's great you could be here. And my other son, Chris, who is a graduate of the University of Maine, and so he has offset the Bowdoin connection a little bit. But two of you, thank you for being here. This event is of importance to me because it gives me an opportunity to really call upon many of the people that I've had the extraordinary pleasure and opportunity to work with. A number of them are listed in the program of those who have been here before, from prime ministers to secretaries of state and Dan Rather and Bob Woodward and Attorney General Holder and Jim Jones and others. It gives me an opportunity to bring them to the University of Maine and to have a discussion. And that's what I'd like to do today. And I couldn't think of anyone that I really have wanted over the years more than to have Alan Simpson with us today. He's an extraordinary man, married to an extraordinary woman, Anne. We call her Annie, but it's Anne, a beautiful and just exquisite lady who has been a friend to me for all of the years that the two of them have known me. Alan is, he's a tall, lean, follically challenged, wise and witty cowboy from Wyoming. And he has managed to take a brilliant mind and to leaven it and lighten it with great humor. And he is able to say some of the toughest things that need to be said in a way that makes you, first of all, it hits you in the center of the forehead with its precision and targeting accuracy, and then he makes you laugh. He makes you laugh at him, but he makes you laugh at us, and he makes you laugh at the folly of the things that we do from time to time. And I will never forget the first time that I really had occasion to talk to Alan. We were down in the Senate dining room, and he came over to me. He said, "I'm really mad." He said, "Senator Jesse Helms is upstairs, and he's carrying on this filibuster. I think it's for a penny a gallon gas tax or 5 cents a gallon gas tax or something." But whatever it was, Jesse was carrying on this filibuster, and Alan said, "Take a look at these few comments I'm going to make on the Senate floor." He said, "What do you think?" And I looked at it and I said, "I think you better tone it down." And so I took my pen and I started to make some alterations on what I saw on the paper. He says, "Thanks very much." He said, "I think I'm going to give it the way I want to give it." And he said, "I'm going up there and I'm going to roll this thing up and I'm going to roll it under Jesse's desk like it's a hand grenade or an IED, as they would say today." And it exploded. And it exploded in front of Jesse because it took Jesse on saying, "Look, this institution, you can't hold and bottle this place up because of this narrow issue. And if you're going to do that, you better be prepared that down the line, when there's something that involves tobacco or some other commodity that is unique to your state, I'm going to be up there and I'm going to carry on just like Faust. So you better be prepared to deal with me in the future." Well, it had the impact that he had hoped. And Jesse didn't like it. And he carried a grudge for a while until he finally got to know the real Al Simpson. Alan Simpson is somebody who has been out there from day one talking about the number one issue that we have been confronted with, the one in which we see civility actually being broken down over budgets, over debt, over deficits. And I was looking through trying to say, how do I introduce this extraordinary man without just going through his resume, and you can read that on your own because it has been extraordinary, with his father also serving as a senator, knew Margaret Chase Smith, worked with Senator Margaret Chase Smith, and he and I had the chance to do it together. Each of us were given a chance to write a final essay as we were leaving the Senate. There were 14 of us that left in 1996, and we wrote an essay for something I think it was called Lessons and Legacies. And I'll read just a couple of comments about what I had to say, and we never had a chance to compare notes. In fact, I had never read Alan's comment until today, coming up on the plane. What I had to say was the following. The first order of business in the restoration of confidence in our ability to govern is the need to achieve a rational fiscal policy for our nation. In the past, we have paved the road to political success with the promissory notes issued in the names of our children. It's a road that can no longer be traveled. Not long ago, it was customary for parents to borrow money for the purpose of ensuring a better future for their children. Today, the ethic of self-sacrifice has been perversely inverted. Parents and grandparents now borrow from their heirs so they might enjoy the comforts and pleasantries of the moment. And this is tantamount to fiscal child abuse, where the beatings are inflicted incrementally and the damage is not immediately visible. But eventually the pain suffered by our children becomes so excruciating and crippling for them to endure. And unfortunately, the wages of our sins will be paid by others after we have departed from public office or this planet. And that's what I had to say as part of my farewell address. And I looked at Alan Simpson's comments as he was also writing about his experience and saying why he was leaving. And he said at the very end of his piece, he said, "We cannot make these choices if the federal government runs on autopilot. And decisions about such vital issues were made for us long ago through the establishment of mandatory spending decisions that we refuse to change. Liberal or conservative, young or old, an internationalist or libertarian, isolationist, businessman or laborer, all of us have had a stake in the ability to effect positive change for the causes that we care about. And this requires us to look anew at the entire machinery of mandatory automatic spending and to determine how best to prevent it from driving our posterity into bankruptcy." And that has been the motivating goal of Alan Simpson. You all know about his role on the Simpson-Bowles Commission. He has, since the writing of that and the filing of that, he has taken his and Erskine Bowles' show on the road to say that we are in danger of forfeiting our future, that we're running a $16 trillion debt, that we know what needs to be done to reduce that debt, that we know what has to be done to reduce the annual deficits, and we are simply unwilling to measure up to those tasks. And so he's been carrying this message. The one thing I would say about Alan, he has a great sense of humor. He'll make you laugh. But what stands out for me about him is his courage. He has a backbone of steel. I have watched him take on every major interest in our country. And every interest has a voice in our society. But he's taken on the biggest and the toughest and has never shied away. He does it with great humor, but he also does it with love. And I want to just close with this because I want you to hear from him today. One thing that really struck me one day, Alan would get out on the Senate and tell stories. He's a marvelous storyteller. And he would say, a friend of his came up and said, "Did you hear that Joe Jones, or whatever the individual's name was, passed away?" And Alan said, "My God, I didn't know that. I better write to his widow and express my condolences." And he said he sat down and he penned a beautiful letter to the widow about how important Joe was to his life, what contributions he made to his fellow citizens, etc. And he sent it off. And about a day or two later, the friend came back and said, "Sorry, I made a mistake. Joe didn't die." And Alan was beside himself to get in touch with the widow, say, don't open that letter. Don't open it, just throw it away. And the moral of his message was, why do we wait until the end, until it's too late to tell someone that we love them? And that struck me when he gave that speech. It has stayed with me. And it's important that we look at him as a man of great toughness, of intellect and humor, but also of great heart and great love. And that's the reason I wanted him to be here, because you will be entertained. I'm going to keep my comments to a bare minimum, because you hear me talk all the time, but you don't hear a man of a Will Rogers' insight and wisdom and wit appear before this audience very often. Thank you.
Now please welcome Mark Woodward, former Bangor Daily News executive editor. Mr. Woodward will moderate a conversation with Senator Simpson and Secretary Cohen.
Welcome again, Mr. Secretary and Senator Simpson. The two of you share so much in common. You began and ended your Senate careers on the same day. You were both highly regarded as senators who could work with members of the other party. And in your post-Senate careers and experiences, each of you served presidents who were Democrats. And I'd like to start with you, Senator Simpson, if I could, and ask you what the experience was like working with a president of the opposing party, just the experience that you had.
Well, first, since he dropped the whole load there, and of all the introductions I've ever had, that was the most recent.
But you had to expect that.
But just quickly, it was easy to gravitate toward this man when we came to the Senate together. It was just, to me, it was, and I met the boys, and Kevin is here, Chris, I'll see later. Here is a guy, warm, wise, witty, savvy, really savvy, smart. I mean, knows what the hell is going on, but he has something. Everybody has some degree of knowledge, but few people have wisdom. That's what he has. But he has an additional trait which is extraordinary, which is sensitivity. And he has mastered the fact that politics alone is barbaric. You have to have the softening agents of life, books, music, theater, the visual and performing arts. And then he came out with this book, Roll Call. I would remember the name of it, the first book. And I read that and I thought, man, that's him. And through the years, he was my mentor. I only wish that I had remembered what he said when I went out to be very uncivil to Jesse. It was not a good day. He said, if I was you, well, I'd change this and this and this. I said, Cohen, get out of here. And so I got my size 15 4E shoe down deep in my mouth. Anyway, so when I came to the Senate, I wanted to be on the Judiciary Committee. He was on the Judiciary Committee in the House when he set his own tone of success. So I went to Strom Thurmond, who was the Republican. I said, I want to be on Judiciary. I chaired that in the Wyoming legislature. He said, I'll talk to Ted. Ted will put you right on there. And Kennedy was the chairman. I went to Ted. I said, I've done this work. This is where all the work is done in the legislative body, selfishly, the Judiciary Committee. He said, great. Come on, and I think I'm going to assign 3 people to you to kind of show you the ropes. And it was Ken Feinberg and David Boyce and Stephen Breyer. And And they said, we're not here to do the Democrat tango with you or how to diddle the Republicans. We'll teach you how this committee works. And I learned. And of course, it assisted me all through my 18 years. But that was called trust. There is no trust in Congress now, not even within their own parties. Trust is the coin of the realm, and that coin is severely tarnished. And once you lose trust, and it's all gone. I can tell you, Erskine and I have been all over that campus for the last 3 years. Guys, we know they're in Congress, they've got the button, and then they'll say, save us from ourselves. How's that for courage? So, trust, I did. I didn't care how they lived or what they did. That's a different judgment day. But for me, did they keep their word? Did we shake hands? Anytime Cohen told me something, I just put it in the book. And those people, you go on and it's easy life from there. So that's the relationship I had with Ted Kennedy and Al Cranston and Gary Hart, who became a very close friend, and you co-authored a book with him. If you mention that now, you liked Ted Kennedy, did you? I said, yeah, I did. Oh boy, well, you're sick, you know. And then Kennedy would say, you like Simpson? He'd say, Kennedy, you're sick. But it's gone. And it will take a long time to repair, and that's a long answer, but I got a lot off my chest and didn't answer your question.
So I'll repeat the question. In your most recent experience on the Simpson Bowles Commission, did you feel any restoration of that trust? Was there any part of that experience, either with President Obama or with your co-chair, that said, gee, I'm getting some vibes here from my past experience when things worked?
Erskine and I suffered a blowback of people who negotiate. You have to know your negotiator partner. Neither of us really knew Barack Obama. We went to him and we said, you've appointed us. Is everything on the table? Yes, it is. It was a good conversation. But Erskine was the last guy to balance the budget as chief of staff with Bill Clinton. How did he do that? By working for months with Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey. Nobody would even think that could happen. So you have this situation now where you have to know your client and you have to know the level of where you're going in the negotiations. So we put this plan on the table December 1st, 2010, which was higher. The bar was set. He couldn't touch it. Obama couldn't touch it because his base would have said, wait a minute, you said you'd cut the deficit in half, you didn't do that, and you would close Guantanamo, you didn't do that, and now you're messing with precious senior citizens in the entitlements. And buddy, you keep doing that and you'll be history. If he had voted for it, the Republicans at that time would have caucused and voted against it unanimously. That's the venom, and that's in the snake right now.
Mr. Secretary, anything to add or amplify on that?
Well, I'll just say a couple of words. I'm sort of the accidental Secretary of Defense, and most of my colleagues that I played sports with said Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Offense maybe, but Secretary of Defense. But I didn't know Bill Clinton personally. I had shaken his hand a couple of times at various functions. And when he got reelected, and I had already announced my retirement, we had basically 2 meetings. And he, after talking to me, decided that he was going to offer me this position. And I said, there are 2 things that we have to agree on. Number one, you have to understand that if you offer me this job and I agree to accept, I'll become part of your team. I'll be on your team. And you will never have to worry whether or not after a cabinet meeting, I'm in the back room saying, guess what? Calling my buddies up on the hill, look what these guys are talking about. You'll never have to worry about that. You will have trust in me, and you'll have to trust me. And I said, but I want something from you. I want, if I take this position and you offer it, I want you to agree never to engage me in a political meeting. Anytime you're going to talk politics, I want out of the meeting, and don't even call to ask me. You let me run the department, and I will do that, and I will serve you as well as I can, but never engage me in any of your political discussions. And he said, you got it, and he kept his word. I was never involved in any political discussion. And I will tell you, it really was the most rewarding 4 years of my life. There's nothing quite like being Secretary of Defense of the finest military in the world. There's nothing that will ever compare to that. And just to have that opportunity to represent our young men and women, I know this is Veterans Awareness and Celebration and Week here at the university. But to be able to serve with some of they are the best and the brightest, and to see these kids, 18 and 19-year-old children, who are making extraordinary sacrifices and doing things that are beyond contemplation, actually. To be with them and to represent them was the greatest experience of my life. And I'm thankful to Bill Clinton to this day for giving me that chance.
You each alluded to it. Were there times when you were walking through the tunnel down the hall and a real Republican came the other way and across the street? Did you ever have difficulty with any of your colleagues because of your having accepted a position with a Democratic president?
Initially, Democrats were pretty upset with it. They said, hey, wait a minute, this guy didn't vote for you, he didn't contribute to you, and you're going to give one of the top positions in the country to this guy? And he's not one of us. And so they had their own questions about it, and I had Republicans who said, what are you doing? You're going to serve a Democratic president? You're going to, whatever credibility you have, you're going to offer it to him? What are you doing to the party? And I said, I didn't know that there were partisan politics played with the security of the country, that I'm going to serve the president to the best of my ability. And I'll tell you one little story that I spoke with some students earlier, that there came a moment at the time when we launched the mission called Desert Fox, a 4-day bombing campaign in 1998 against Saddam Hussein, when the Republicans thought we were playing politics with the military and insisted that I come up and address a joint session of Congress at night that lasted for 3 hours, where they accused me and the president of wagging the dog, saying that we had launched this attack in order to avoid an impeachment resolution that was forthcoming. And I took the 3 hours and spoke to all of my colleagues in a closed session and persuaded them that this had nothing to do with what was going on. This had to do with the security of the country, and this plan had been in preparation for some time. Well, they finally accepted it, and I put it on the line saying, I will tell you after 24 years on Capitol Hill, I will put all of that in front of you and say, I will put that on the line saying, if you think that I would risk my reputation to do this, and you've misjudged me.
But the real risk was the zealots who saw him lending his reputation and his integrity to a president they hated. That was really that how could you, Bill, go burnish his image because you are you and we all respect you, and they do from both sides of the aisle and always did. But that was the one that I got. And then when you came to Harvard and I was teaching at Harvard, I couldn't have got into Harvard if I'd picked the locks. But there I was, and here comes Cohen, and he told me what the president had said and gave a wonderful talk, and those, and you served with, well, I've always said, if you have integrity, nothing else matters, and if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. It's very simple. And that was the worry, much with Mineta. When Mineta was asked to serve George W. as Secretary of Commerce and Transportation, he got the same load that you got. How could you do this? He wasn't. And he told him the same thing. He said, if you think I'm going on any political activity for you, get me off the screen. And he served with the same great distinction. He was a boyhood friend. I met him when he was behind barbed wire at the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. We were 12-year-old boys. He was behind barbed wire. I'm living in Cody. American citizens. Another story.
The current Congress has abysmal public approval ratings, is considered dysfunctional, immobilized by partisanship. In contrast, you've each worked on a number of very high-profile bipartisan panels: Watergate, Iran-Contra, the Iraq Study Group, and most recently the Simpson-Bowles Commission. Those panels considered controversial and politically charged issues, but somehow your efforts produced substantive results. Senator Simpson, based on your experience, can you give us some examples of the legislative process working as it should, and tell us why you think lawmakers were able to work together successfully?
The first one that hit me was just a few weeks after we both came together to the Senate when they appointed the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy. And Howard Baker put me on there. I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. We don't, that's an issue, except in Wyoming in 1962 with the Mexican farm workers. There was a thing in America people have forgotten. It was called Operation Wetback. What do you think of that one? And they came and got them, the braceros, and removed them back to Mexico. That was, people forgotten that little. But there's been racism and bigotry all shot through. But anyway, of immigration, refugee. So Father Ted Hesburgh was the chairman. Just talked to him the other day. He's 96. And on that commission was Kennedy and Mazzoli and Handfish and Democrats and Republicans, Mathias. As Strong said, Mathias. He said, watch out for Mathias, Al. He's a very liberal Republican. Yeah. So anyway, we did our work and came out with 2 bills. After all that work, one was on illegal immigration and one was on legal immigration. The legal immigration bill never worked because we tried to put in there, Kennedy and I and the rest, a more secure identifier system, which the right and the left then called a national ID card. And once that little meteor went up, a national ID card came from Grover Norquist and the ACLU, man, oh man, the earth crumbled. Now they're talking about retina scans and, you know, fingerprints, and nobody's written a thing about that. Anyway, that was a success in that way. And then the Iraq Study Group, 10 of us. Sandra Day, Leon Panetta, you know the cast. We worked with them all. And we had to agree on every single word. And we worked for a couple of years and gave 57 recommendations to the Bush-Cheney administration, of which they adopted 5. Since then, 57 of them were adopted, surge, all the rest of the stuff. But then people say, why don't you work together? So we did. But people, they want bipartisanship, but they really don't. They would rather fight and whack each other around. But anyway, that was an extraordinary thing. And when you have Sandra Day O'Connor the last day saying, Alan, this word you're using a split infinitive. I said, Sandra, I don't even know what the hell they are, so what does it mean to me? But then came this thing, and Erskine and I worked, and what did we did? We worked for 8 months, and we got 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans and 1 independent. That's 60% of the commission. How can you get more bipartisan? With a range from Dick Durbin of Illinois to Tom Coburn of Oklahoma. But you see, people would say, well, who's on your commission? You say, well, we got the votes of this many, 11 people, including a range between Dick Durbin of Illinois, and they say, Dick Durbin of Illinois, that commie guy from Illinois? And then, yeah, well, Tom Coburn voted for Tom Coburn, that guy, that Neanderthal Republican from Oklahoma, and that's your country today. You just name a person, and then they'll dissect that person, just split, you know, with a partisan shot from the right and the left, and it's a contact sport.
Mr. Secretary, any examples of, particularly of how things worked and why?
Well, you mentioned Iran-Contra. Senator Mitchell and I both served on that committee together and wrote a book called Men of Zeal, which I would recommend to you as the best single book on the subject.
It's out of print, isn't it?
It's out of print. You can't get it. But that was an occasion which Republicans and Democrats had to work together to say, what happened? We had a situation in which we had a public policy announced that we would never sell arms to Iran. But we had a covert program that was, in fact, selling arms to Iran, inflating the price that they would have to pay, and then using the profits from that particular covert sale to fund the Contra effort in Nicaragua. And so basically you had an illegal, I think Colonel North said, a standalone, self-sustaining covert capability that was established outside the realm of the appropriation process that only a few people knew about. So you were conducting a foreign policy secretly that the American people had no idea, and most members of Congress had no idea. And it suddenly erupted, and it became news, and then you had the Iran-Contra Committee, and then you had Republicans and Democrats who came together and saying, here are the things that are wrong with this and why, and the country accepted it. President Reagan, to his credit, said, look, I didn't realize I was doing this, but if I did it, it was wrong, and frankly, because of his popularity, he escaped something that President Nixon did. It wasn't the same magnitude as President Nixon, but it came close, because you cannot set up a secret covert capability that has no accountability and which the American people are completely unaware of.
I don't think anyone will ever forget George Mitchell, our colleague's shot at North.
Oh, yeah.
That was a piece of work.
Yeah, sure.
Never forget that one. Powerful.
God does not take sides in American politics. Say God does not take sides in American politics.
Boy, it was everybody in the Congress read it, and everybody in the Senate went up and said, you know, it takes truth to power to do that, and it was about America and not Democrats and Republicans or Contras or Sandinistas. It was powerful stuff. And I've already been to the Mitchell lecture in Colby, and now I've paid you here, receiving nothing at either one of those venues. I believe in free speech, but this is ridiculous.
He didn't tell you that I went all the way out to Laramie.
Oh, I did. I didn't, because I said, Bill, you have to come to the University of Wyoming. He said, I will, and he busted his fanny, and I wasn't there. But my brother was there, and, and Brother Pete was very good with you. And
He was.
Yes, he was.
How would you compare the environment in Congress when you were there working in the Senate and the way it is today? Kind of a general question, but one that really gets to the heart of the whole civility issue. You know, what's happened to the political chemistry down in D.C.?
Right.
Well, you have it. It's not inter-party. It's intra-party. You have Schumer waiting desperately for Durbin to go down in flames because he voted for this package, Standing in the Wings. I suppose Cantor looks like something out of Shakespeare, Standing in the Wings, with Boehmer, who I think now has paid all his dues to the extremists and others in our party, saying, you know, I kept the whole thing running for 2 more weeks, and you came up with a 0, so next time you get all keyed up, just know I ain't there. And that should take care of that. Like, I did what you wanted me to do. It was a feckless thing. You came up with nothing. An old cowboy and Cody taught me once. He said, if your horse drops dead, it's better to get off. And so that has happened. But you have 2 people in Reed and McConnell who don't like each other at all. It's quite obvious they don't. And when we worked together, Byrd, and we started with a couple of masters, Baker and Byrd, and then we had Dole and Daschle and Mitchell, and then I had the assistant leaders I worked with were Cranston and Wendell Ford, who became dear friends. And It was just, and you had those serious committees, and you're ranking people, and Major, tell them who those people were and how it worked. You were awesome at that.
Well, Sam Nunn. Sam Nunn and I worked together. We created something back in we worked on many things together, but in 1987, Sam joined me because I took the initiative at that time to create the Special Operations Command and the Assistant Secretary of Low Intensity Conflict called SOLIC. But basically, over the objections of the Pentagon, I wanted to create a command that was designed to take our best and our brightest and to use them in a way that they would be aware of the culture, of the language, of the traditions of the country that they were going to be deployed to. They would be our forward-based eyes and ears and help understand what that country was thinking of, and also help us prepare if we had a friend or foe. That was opposed by the Pentagon, strongly opposed. Sam joined me, and the two of us were able to create the Special Operations Command, which today is probably the most in demand of any of the commands. It's called low density, high demand. You have few people doing lots of things, and it's all embraced under SEAL teams and Rangers and so forth. But it's calling upon a very select group of our best and brightest to be able to operate in hostile environments without necessarily having to fire shots, but to gather intelligence and to help shape the battlefield if there's going to be a battlefield. So that was one in which Senator Nunn joined with me, and we passed it, and it is now one of the most effective commands that we have.
Why isn't something like that possible today? It doesn't seem to be happening. There's something missing.
Well, what's happened is that the country has become fragmented in one sense, and I spoke earlier today with the students, but the American people are not polarized as a general proposition. The political parties are polarized. The American people, and I like to say this, are either they're slightly right of center, basically conservative people, slightly right of center, or they're slightly left of center, given the circumstances. If you're heading into a depression, you expect the government to take a more active role in trying to resolve the issues, so that'll put you further on the Barack Obama camp initially, saying, what can the government do? But basically, if you get too far right or too far left, you're going to lose the support of the vast majority of the people who are in the middle. And I think what's happened in politics today is that the party activists, and they tend to be the most passionate in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, they're the ones who go out and pound on the doors and lick all the stamps, et cetera, if we even use stamps anymore, but the ones who feel most passionately about politics. But they are driving the agenda. And you take that in combination with the scandal of money raising today, it is obscene what it costs to run a congressional campaign or a Senate campaign or a presidential campaign. $1 billion to run a presidential campaign. You have one individual out in Las Vegas who pledged $100 million for one of our candidate, Republican candidate. So if you have 5 or 10 mega millionaires who pledge $100 million, right? And 10 people, you can get a $1 billion campaign. How do you go against that? So what's happened is money has become the driving force in politics, and most of our former colleagues, not so much when we were there, but now the colleagues who are serving, they spend all of their time when they're not home and they're not on the floor. They're dialing for dollars all day long, and it's obscene. And if any of you were to stand outside the Senate chamber and watch the gauntlet that members of Congress have to push through to get to the floor, with people grabbing you by the arms saying, vote up, vote down, we supported you, don't forget, you'd be pretty upset about this, the way the country's being run. But that's what takes place on a daily basis. So it's money, it's a lack of accountability, it's also the fact that gerrymandering has really set the stage so that Republicans just have to worry of somebody coming from their right, and Democrats now somebody coming from their left. So the parties are pulling them to the extremes, and people are being punished We have Bob Bennett, a good friend of yours. You might talk about Bob, one of the most conservative senators from a conservative state of Utah. And he happened to reach across the aisle on the TARP issue when Barack Obama first came into office, and he was punished for it. This brilliant senator punished. So I think it's money. It's the 24-hour cable, the talk shows, whipping people up, and it's the phone that we all carry, this thing. Now you can start a revolution with a Twitter, right? We've seen it happen. And so the real issue, I think, is in this country and in other countries, do we have the ability to govern ourselves any longer? Do we have the ability to try to do what Alan and I did with Gary Hart or Sam Nunn or John Glenn, and the list goes on? Say, how do we work together to make things happen? And I think we have lost that willingness and that ability, and until such time as Republicans, and they're starting to do it now, speak out against the more extreme elements, and the Democrats have to do the same, and say, let's work together on the big issues, because we know what we have to do. We know what the Simpson-Bowles Commission recommended. It's all laid out right there. Here's how we get control. Here's how we start reducing the size of this monster that's going to consume our kids.
You mentioned the media. We were talking about this earlier. When you began your careers in Congress, the daily news was capsulated in a half an hour. In the evening, there were 3 major networks. We've got the 24-hour news cycle now. We've got the advent of what they call tribal media, cable stations pandering to the extremes on both sides. How can we elevate the discourse and bring more civility into our conversations when people do not even begin their conversations with the same set of facts?
Well, Alan's a master of dealing with the media. He's loved by the media.
I've done such a beautiful job. I wrote a book about the media called Right in the Old Gazoo. It's out of print, too. And it was about me describing the failings of the media. And boy, I tell you, David Broder, our pal, wonderful ace reporter, he was the best. He read it and he said, Simpson, I agree with about 60% of that, but the rest of it is just a screed, it's a rant. But you're right. But one other thing, what Bill was saying, he was talking about the right and the left. You can name a couple so that you get clear on this. If you're a Republican seeking solace and surcease and re-election and suddenly talk about taxes or revenue, you'll be visited by the Club for Growth or Grover Norquist, who will come to your home in a white robe and visit with you. And if you're a lefty over there, and you're suddenly talking about entitlement reform and doing something to precious Social Security just stupidly to make it solvent for 75 years, it's a stupid idea, let's admit that. And for God's sake, you're going to be visited by the AARP and their local representatives and the ACLU and the AFL-CIO. That's where you are right now. And the worst part of it is that if you're the leader and McConnell can come to Grassley and say, you keep messing around with Baucus and putting together whatever you're cooking over there, and I'm going to make you chairman of the Journal Committee. Now, that may not sound anything, but then Reed will say, to somebody, you're working with with Saxby over there, that Republican? Careful there, because I can put you in a whole new position in the Democratic leadership. That's the power that's being wielded now. And it's really obvious when you see it up close.
Talk about the media, your experience with the media.
Well, I always had a rule when they were after my butt, answer the phone. And they respected that. I always got in trouble. I'll never forget the part about Peter Arnett. I just had a belly full of him because every other media left Baghdad except Peter Arnett. And at the bottom of the screen it said, our loyal correspondent is speaking in the most difficult circumstances, i.e. he's being censored. He couldn't have stuck around any time if he hadn't said, go ahead, tell me what I can and can't say. So I made a beautiful statement that he was a sympathizer. I tell you, the media, I went from the A list to the Z list. Well, he later was, he was the toast of the town then, and I was toast. I remember that. Later, he made the final error. He came out, and he was really supportive of our enemies, and they fired him. And guess who called me to talk about it? The media. Washington Post, New York Times. Did you hear about Peter Arnett? And I said, no, what? Well, they canned him. Well, what did he say? He said he was very hurt. He realized he'd ruined his reputation. He moved on to England, I think, and anyway, whatever it was he said was pretty hard and pretty tough for him to say. Now, what do you have to say? Because you were right in the middle. I said, just take his name out and put my name in, and you're the same people that ragged me, and now you want me to take a spade of dirt and put it in his face. Stuff it. Well, that was the last call I had that week. But think of that. I mean, that's where they were eating their own young.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter.
No.
They're interested in confusion, controversy, and complexity, not clarity. And as long as the media just consists on the 3 C's of confusion, controversy, all the rest of it, and not clarity, this country can't make it. And once a week or twice a week, you read about somebody, we're sorry we didn't vet that more. Well, but in the meantime, just left wreckage of human beings.
And that problem is increasing and accelerating. Any thoughts, Mr. Secretary, on the media and the 24-hour news cycle and what it's doing to our political discourse?
Well, what's happened is there's no longer any filter. When we were growing up, sitting waiting for the test pattern on television to materialize, you had 3 networks. Yeah, and Uncle Walter, one of them with CBS, and David Brinkley, etc. But you had 3 networks that you assumed they at least were providing a filter for the serious and for the silly, to separate them out. Today, we don't have any filter. Today, there's no one filtering the news that's flowing through. It's not even news at times. It's just rumor and speculation and kind of rancid, raw sewage flowing through. And that, to me, is what's happened with the internet and the social media. It's like anything else. Everything has its positive side, but it has a negative side as well. When we think about technology, the blessings of technology, I mean, it has a double edge to it. The same technology that Bill Gates has, Bin Laden had. And so technology itself, it's neutral. I like to say it has no, it's all head, it has no heart. And it all depends on how we're going to use it. I feel the same way about what's happened with the social media and the new media in the terms of it's a river, and in a river there's life and regeneration. But it's also a sewer. And it's the sewer that fills up some of that information that gets into the media, and suddenly something that has no basis in fact, that is just scandalous in terms of its allegations. People can be ruined in a nanosecond. Mm-hmm. People can be eliminated in a nanosecond by being twittered, or to have a photograph taken saying, oh, this was one of the bombers up in Boston. And they showed a photograph of an individual. His face went around the world. He ended up committing suicide and had nothing to do with the bombing. So we're living at a time in which there is no zone of privacy, by the way.
No.
This whole notion, the Europeans are very upset with us. Americans are very upset with us as well. But when I was asked this question, I said, I'm surprised they're surprised. Think about it. When I was in office, I was a vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, and then certainly when I went to the Pentagon, I assumed every single word that I uttered was being recorded by someone, friend or foe. And this is what most people don't understand. It's not only our adversaries that are following us and monitoring us. It's some of our very closest allies. And so when we stepped into the Situation Room at the White House, one of the most secure rooms in America, first thing we did was we took our phones, took the batteries out. or we're not allowed to take the phones in at all because your phone can be activated remotely and used as a listening device by anybody who has access and can get into your phone system. And individuals can. So we've gone from state actors to non-state actors to individuals who now have the capacity to simply read everything. So the notion that suddenly the Europeans are stunned by this, when in fact some of them most stunned have been the most active in stealing our secrets. And so I took a little issue with that. I think there's a line that has to be drawn, but frankly, when Google now is upset, say, my goodness, I can't open my computer in the morning without Amazon telling me what I should be reading based on what I read. We know that Google now is going to be able to tell each of us who have our cell phones, they will tell us as we walk by a store, a Starbucks, oh, by the way, there's a special on with the latte that you like, because they know what you bought the day before or the week before. And you're going to walk through every mall and your phone is going to be going off saying what's on inside, the specials, because they know what your preferences are. So all of this concern about Big Brother, we've had lots of little brothers. They're called credit card companies, and they know everything that we do. And I got a call, I had my card cut off a couple weeks ago, and I was trying to inquire about some device where I could plug in 3 or 4 of my iPhones into this one device. And apparently it struck somebody as being unusual, so they cut my credit card off, and then they called me and said, did you try to make a purchase such as that? It doesn't sound familiar. I said, well, it had to do with these computer plugins. I said, oh yeah, that was me. It was a $28 item. They saw that was an unusual purchase for me and thought my card had been stolen, so they cut the whole card off. So your credit card is watching everything that you do. And Google now is going to make it so that they can have a Google Glass and monitor everything you do and just take a picture of you, etc. So the notion of a zone of privacy, it doesn't exist for many of us. But it's the problem that technology is racing so far ahead of our ability to regulate it. And that's something we've got to come to grips with as a society. But the notion that gentlemen don't read each other's mail, that went out in 1929. And it's not coming back.
Well,
We have time for one more question.
we have to just add one thing. I always say, what the hell you got to hide? Well, that always irritates people, I'll tell you that. But I was on federal probation for shooting mailboxes, and I was sent to Cranbrook School, and Richard out here is a lovely fellow. He went to Cranbrook. I got drunk one night and Laramie and hit a cop and spent a night in jail. And called this woman. She's sitting out there. I was going with her. I said, I need $300 bail. She said, well, I'm working my way through school busters, so you find a way and just spend the night. And I thought, I think I will marry her, which I did. But let me tell you, anybody believes that there's privacy is just stupid. And the people who are sure that we don't have privacy is the media. So gather it up. The first thing they're doing with Blasio up in New York is digging through everything in his background, all the stuff, everything personal. Nothing has anything to do with policy. I don't know if he's a socialist or a commie or whatever the hell he is, but the issue is they're digging. What's the purpose of that? Finding a guy smoking pot when he's 20, sitting under a tree with his hair hanging to his knees, Is this a picture of our candidate for the U.S. Senate? Yes, it is. Jesus, forget it.
We've got time for one more question, and if we could try to end on a note of hope and maybe even optimism. Any observations on what it's going to take to get this national dialogue back on the right track?
Well, it's going to take the people of the country to speak out and say enough is enough. That we can't, you have no idea. I spend most of my time, as many of you know, traveling around the world. In China, India, all throughout the Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN, the Gulf states. They look at us, and they look at us with, it used to be with awe, admiration. Today it's astonishment. This is the United States of America. and you're closed for business? You are the ones who are holding yourselves out as the premier example of what a democracy should be like, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-religious, all of the great things that your country stands for, and you don't have a budget, and you're not going to get one for the next 2 or 3 years. You can't make a decision on what needs to be done on the Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson efforts. You know what has to be done. You can't do it. You will cut your defense budget. Think about this now. And I'm here to say the defense budget can be cut. And it can be cut significantly if you do it the right way,
Right.
if you tailor it to your strategic needs. I like to give a very simple example. Suppose you all go to your doctor, and the doctor says, you know, Bill, you could lose about 20% of your weight here. You're getting a little bit too soft. And it's not good for your health, and ultimately you're going to pay a big penalty for it. So take 20% off. And I say, okay, I can do that. And I go to my tailor. And I rush into the tailor and I say, take 20% off the cuff and 20% off the pants. And I've reached my 20%, which is absurd, isn't it? But that's what we've done with Defense Department, saying, by the way, here's the way you've got to cut 20% out, and you can't touch personnel. That's off the table. So you can only touch O&M, operation and maintenance, and procurement. And you can't say how you're going to cut it. You just have to take it evenly across the board. You say, my goodness, shouldn't you be tailoring the cuts to fit the strategy? You know, this wonderful Sun Tzu quote. Sun Tzu said, if you have strategy but not tactics, it's the slow road to victory. If you have tactics but no strategy, that's the noise you hear before defeat. We don't have a strategy today, and we don't have the tactics today. And so all of these other countries are looking at us, and they're saying, what happened? Where have you gone wrong, and you expect us to follow your lead? You want us to be more like you? No, thank you. We're doing fine without following you. So we've got a lot to do, and that's one of the reasons why the Simpson-Bowles Commission has been so critically important, why it was just taken off the table. It still befuddles me, because in the Simpson-Bowles Commission are all of the recommendations, and they're responsible and rational, and yes, they touch all of us. They touch people like me, say, shouldn't I be able, because of an affluence testing, say, do I really need Social Security at this point in my life? I'm still productive, I'm still working, I can still contribute. And shouldn't there be some changes made in the growth of these programs as was laid out by Alan? And can't we sacrifice for our kids as opposed to borrowing from them now and make them pay our bill? So it's, what's it going to take? It's going to take the American people to say, we've been selfish, we haven't disciplined ourselves, we've gotten soft and flabby in our thinking, in our policies, and we are going to forfeit the future unless we change. So the great thing about this country is that we are so capable of changing, and will change. When we're forced to do so, we will do so. So what's going to take place, and the reason I wanted Alan to come and want him to continue to speak out, is because it's going to take people like him who've been willing to take the heat, to take all of the abuse that he takes on a day-to-day basis for saying we should be challenging and changing our social security programs to make them secure for the future, for the kids who are coming up. And if we don't do that, then we are engaging in a terrible thing, that we're inflicting our kids and grandkids with a burden they'll never pay.
You
Senator
could
Simpson,
do one
final
other
word.
thing, Mark. You could go to the town meeting of your elected representative. Don't forget, Maine and Wyoming are very much alike. You only cast 26% of your vote for Perot. We cast 23%. And people would say, how do we get Bill Clinton? I said, well, you bonehead, you voted for Ross Perot. What's your next question? So Maine and Wyoming will be filled with independent, ornery, God, just the kind of people you love. And you've got another one now, and that's Angus. And he's a piece of work, let me tell you. He's working, trying to make things work. He's not there to see who can torture the Democrats or torture the Republicans, but go to the town meeting, and when you hear that wonderful phrase when the elected representative standing there in the beauty of the glare, looking into the camera with owlish glazed eyes saying, I know what the problem is, but we can get it done without touching precious Medicare, precious Medicaid, precious defense, and precious Social Security. God bless you. And you should get up and say, you, sir, are making a terminological inexactitude. You lying son of a bitch.
Well, thank you very much on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little tough to come back onto the stage after that showstopper, Senator. I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been elevated today when we think about the value of civility and leadership by example. And I would just add one last thought, is the reason we hold this kind of conversation at the university is it's the future of the next generation that this leadership by example we're so pleased to share with our students. Well, Senator, as a quick closure, we have a token of our appreciation. We know you love art. If you could join me just at the podium. We want you and Ann to really enjoy some Maine art and also representative of some of the famous art and culture that you enjoy. We are so grateful for your time to join Secretary Cohen, and we hope you'll come back soon.
Well, I tell you, it won't be, I tell you, we've spent wonderful times here, and when I went into the Army, the ROTC guys from Maine joined the ROTC guys, and we all met at Fort Benning. Ed Chinchet, Jim Arena, oh, I tell you, we had more fun, except when they said, get in your car, we're going to have a party. And I said, but I learned that too. I love this state. You have to love it because it reminds me not just in physical attributes, but people. It reminds me of my native land in Wyoming, and that's the best compliment I can give.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. It's a couple of books. I'll carry them off. Thanks so much.